The stage driver didn't bother helping Iris Vane with her trunk. He just dropped it in the dirt outside what passed for a depot in Hollow Creek and drove off before the dust settled, like he was afraid staying too long might curse him. Iris stood there with four exhausted children clinging to her skirts and stared at what was supposed to be their salvation. It looked like the kind of town people fled from, not toward. Half the buildings along the main street were abandoned, their windows dark and broken. The wind carried grit and the smell of desperation. A few residents watched from doorways with the hard-eyed suspicion of folks who'd learned strangers meant trouble more often than not. Nobody moved to help. Nobody even nodded. 11-year-old Emmett pressed closer to her side. "We shouldn't have come here." "We didn't have anywhere else to go," Iris said quietly. That was the truth, brutal and simple. Her sister Margaret had died 3 months ago from fever that turned her insides to fire. The doctor had come too late and charged too much anyway. Margaret's husband, a good man once, everyone said, had walked into the barn 2 weeks after burying his wife and hanged himself from the loft beam. The neighbors found him when the smell got bad. Iris had been in St. Louis working as a seamstress when the letter came. By the time she arrived, her brother-in-law was already in the ground and the children were being divided up among families who didn't really want them. The bank was seizing the farm. Everything was gone. She'd gathered up Emmett, 9-year-old Delia, and the 6-year-old twins Marcus and Bess, sold what little remained, and headed west with barely enough money to reach the frontier. She'd spent the last of it on stage fare to Hollow Creek, banking everything on one desperate gamble. A newspaper advertisement folded in her coat pocket. Widower, remote ranch, need practical woman, children tolerated, no softness required. Write Caleb Mercer, Hollow Creek. Most women would have run from an advertisement that blunt. Iris had written back immediately. She'd been honest in her letter, painfully so. Told him she had 4 children who depended on her now. Told him she could cook, mend, manage a household, and work harder than most men if necessary. Told him she wasn't looking for romance or comfort, just survival, and a place the children could grow up without being torn apart. His response had been equally direct. "Come if you must. Ranch is 10 miles north. Ask at the Mercantile." Not exactly a warm invitation, but Iris had learned to measure hope in smaller increments. A roof was a roof, work was work, and the children needed stability more than they needed promises. Delia tugged on her sleeve. "On, Iris? I'm hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We'll get food soon." "You said that this morning," Marcus muttered. The boy's face was sunburned and his clothes were too small. All the children looked half-starved and exhausted. Bess didn't say anything. She hadn't spoken much since watching her father's coffin lowered into the ground. She just held onto her twin brother's hand and stared at the dusty street with eyes too old for 6 years. Iris picked up the trunk, lighter than it should have been because they'd sold most of their belongings just to eat, and started walking toward the only building that looked marginally maintained, a weathered mercantile with a hand-painted sign that might have said Harding's before the desert sun bleached half the letters away. The bell above the door rattled when they entered. Inside, a thin man with gray whiskers looked up from behind the counter. His eyes moved from Iris to the children and back again. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way he held himself. Wariness, maybe? Or pity. "Help you?" His voice was flat. "I'm looking for directions to the Mercer Ranch." The man's eyebrows went up slightly. "You're the woman Mercer wrote to." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when it involved someone like Caleb Mercer. Iris had learned that much from the stage driver's reaction when she'd mentioned the name. The man had gone quiet for a full minute before muttering something about bad luck following some men like shadows. "I am," Iris said. "Can you tell me how to get there?" "I can tell you." The mercantile owner set down the ledger he'd been working on. "Question is whether I should. Mercer Ranch ain't a place for children, ma'am. That's hard country out there. And Mercer himself," he trailed off, choosing his words carefully. "He ain't been right since his wife died. Keeps to himself. Works that land like he's punishing it for something. Most of his hands quit last season. I didn't come all this way to turn back now. Maybe you should have." The man's tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "Look, I don't know what he told you in his letters, but Caleb Mercer ain't the marrying kind anymore. He's barely the living kind. That ranch is dying slow, and he don't seem to care much about stopping it. Iris felt Emmett tense beside her. The boy was always listening, always watching, always ready to bolt if the situation turned bad. She put a hand on his shoulder. "We don't have anywhere else to go," she said simply. "So either you tell me how to reach the ranch, or we'll find it ourselves." The mercantile owner studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "North Road out of town. Follow it about 8 miles until you see a turnoff marked by a dead cottonwood. Take that west another 2 miles. You'll see the ranch buildings eventually if the dust ain't too bad. If you're smart, We'll manage," Iris interrupted. "Thank you." She bought a loaf of bread and some dried meat with the last coins in her purse. The children ate standing up while she asked about wagon rental. There wasn't any to be had. Everything in Hollow Creek was either broken, sold off, or claimed by Vernon Pike, the man who apparently owned half the territory and wanted the other half. "Pike's the reason this town's dying," the mercantile owner said while wrapping the food. "Bought up the freight contracts, controls most of the water rights, and charges whatever he wants because folks got no choice. Anyone who stands up to him usually ends up ruined or run off. Mercer's one of the last holdouts, and that ain't going to end well for him." "Why doesn't someone stop Pike?" The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what?" "The law out here belongs to whoever's got the money to buy it. Pike's got territorial judges in his pocket and enough hired guns to make sure nobody gets brave ideas about fairness. You're walking into a bad situation, ma'am. Just thought you should know." Iris thanked him again and led the children back outside. The sun was brutal and unforgiving. The wind carried dust that got into everything: eyes, mouth, lungs. Emmett walked ahead, shoulders rigid with tension. Delia tried to keep the twins distracted with a counting game, but they were too tired and hot to care. They walked. The road north was exactly as bad as expected. Rutted, dry, lined with scrub brush, and not much else. The landscape felt hostile in a way that went beyond heat and distance. It felt cursed, like the land itself had given up. After an hour, Marcus started crying. Quietly at first, then harder when his feet started bleeding through his worn-out shoes. Iris stopped and tore strips from her petticoat to wrap his feet, trying not to think about how they'd barely made it to the ranch and things were already falling apart. "I can carry him," Emmett said. "You've been carrying that trunk for the last mile. You're exhausted." "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. None of them were fine. But Iris let him hoist Marcus onto his back anyway because the boy needed to feel useful, needed to feel like he was protecting someone. It was the only thing keeping him from breaking completely. They kept walking. The sun moved across the sky. The dead cottonwood finally appeared like a skeletal finger pointing west. They took the turnoff and continued into emptier country where even the desperate scrub brush seemed to thin out. Then finally, the ranch came into view. It looked like someone had tried to build something permanent and failed. The main house was solid enough, 2 stories, wood frame, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. But the paint was peeling, several shutters hung crooked, and the whole structure had a neglected feel that spoke of years without care. Beyond the house stood a barn, a few outbuildings, and corrals with fencing that looked like it was held together by stubbornness alone. Cattle grazed in the distance, but not many. Maybe 30 head where there should have been hundreds. Everything was too quiet. Iris set down the trunk and straightened her dress. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides and took a breath. "Stay close," she told the children. They crossed the yard toward the house. Chickens scattered. A skeletal dog lifted its head from the porch, looked at them without interest, and went back to sleep. The front door opened before they reached it. A man stepped out onto the porch. Caleb Mercer was tall and lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate less. His face was weathered beyond his years, probably mid-30s, but looking older. Dark hair, darker eyes, and an expression that gave away exactly nothing. He wore work clothes that had seen better days, and a gun belt like it was part of his body. He looked at Iris, then at the children. His gaze stopped on the twins, stayed there a moment too long. When he finally looked back at Iris, something had shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger exactly, more like the careful neutrality of a man who'd just realized he'd been misled. "You said 2 children," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "I have 4, Iris replied. "Your letter said 2. Letter? I said I had children who depended on me. I didn't specify how many because I was afraid you wouldn't respond if I told the truth." Caleb's jaw tightened. So you lied. I omitted. There's a difference. Not to me. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Iris could feel Emmett rigid beside her, could hear Delia's breathing go shallow, could sense the twins shrinking back. One word from this man and they'd be back on that road with nowhere left to go. She didn't beg, didn't apologize. She just stood there and met Caleb Mercer's eyes with the same unflinching directness that had gotten her this far. If survival is all you're offering, she said quietly, then survival is enough. We already know how to do the rest. Caleb stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Memory, maybe, or recognition of something he'd thought was long dead. Finally, he stepped back from the door. Meals are at 6 and 6. You sleep upstairs, second and third rooms. Children stay quiet after dark. I don't want to hear them. He walked past her without another word and headed toward the barn. Iris stood there for a moment, not quite believing what had just happened. Is that a yes? Delia whispered. I think so, Iris said. Emmett picked up the trunk without being asked and carried it up the porch steps. The old dog lifted its head again, sniffed vaguely in their direction, and decided they weren't worth the effort of moving. Inside, the house was exactly what Iris expected. Functional, cold, and completely devoid of anything that suggested a woman had ever lived there. The furniture was sparse and practical. The floors were clean but scarred. The kitchen had a good stove and sturdy table, but no curtains, no decorations, no warmth. It looked like a place someone existed in but didn't live. It's awful, Marcus said. It's shelter, Iris corrected. We'll make it better. She assigned the children rooms and started unpacking what little they had. The upstairs bedrooms were bare except for beds and basic furniture, but they were clean and dry. That was more than they'd had in weeks. By the time she came back downstairs, the sun was starting to set. She found the kitchen and started taking inventory of what was available. The pantry was better stocked than she expected. Flour, beans, salt pork, canned goods. Caleb Mercer might have given up on a lot of things, but he hadn't given up on eating. She started dinner. It had been 3 days since any of them had eaten a real meal. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar rhythm of cooking while her mind raced through everything that had just happened. They were here. They had shelter. They had food. It wasn't safe yet. Nothing was safe. But it was something. At 6 o'clock exactly, Caleb came in from outside. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. Just walked to the kitchen, washed his hands at the pump, and sat at the table. The children filed in quietly. Too quietly. Emmett positioned himself between Caleb and the twins like a guard dog. Delia kept her eyes down. Marcus and Bess barely breathed. Iris served the meal, beans, cornbread, fried salt pork, and sat down. Nobody spoke. Caleb ate methodically, not looking at anyone. When he finished, he stood, carried his plate to the wash basin, and walked out. The door closed behind him. Is he always like that? Delia asked. I don't know, Iris admitted, but she suspected the answer was yes. The first week was brutal. Iris woke before dawn and worked until her hands bled. She cleaned the house from top to bottom. She mended clothes, fixed hinges, patched holes in walls. She cooked meals that Caleb ate in silence before disappearing back into the endless work that consumed him. The children tried to help, but mostly just stayed out of the way. Emmett followed Caleb everywhere, watching him with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. The boy was trying to figure out whether this man was trustworthy or just another adult who'd eventually abandoned them. Caleb ignored him completely, which somehow seemed worse than rejection. Delia found an old washboard and started doing laundry without being asked. She was 9 years old and already understood how to make herself useful enough to keep. The twins played quietly in the yard, their games subdued and strange. They didn't laugh much. Sometimes Iris caught them staring at the horizon like they expected their parents to come walking back any minute. By the end of the first week, Iris understood why Caleb's ranch hands had quit. The man worked like he was trying to kill himself through sheer exhaustion. He was up before sunrise and still moving after sunset. He repaired fences alone, moved cattle alone, handled everything alone because asking for help seemed like admitting weakness. He also barely spoke. Days went by where the only words out of his mouth were yes, no, or pass the salt. It was like living with a ghost. On the 8th day, Iris found him in the barn, trying to lift a broken wagon wheel by himself. He'd already strained something in his back. She could see it in the way he moved, but he kept trying anyway. She walked over and grabbed the other side of the wheel. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Helping." "I don't need help." "You clearly do." They stared at each other over the broken wheel. Then Caleb lifted his side and Iris lifted hers, and together they moved it to the workbench. "Thank you," he muttered. It was the first time he'd said that word since she arrived. That night at dinner, Caleb looked at Emmett. "You know how to ride?" The boy stiffened. "Some." "Be ready at dawn tomorrow. You're coming with me to move the herd." Emmett's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Can't do it alone anymore. Might as well make use of you." It wasn't warm, it wasn't fatherly, but it was something. After Caleb left, Emmett turned to Iris with an expression she hadn't seen since before his parents died. Hope. The second week, things started shifting. Delia discovered the remnants of a garden behind the house, overgrown, choked with weeds, but still clinging to life. She asked Caleb if she could work on it. He shrugged like he didn't care, but the next morning there was a shovel leaning against the porch that hadn't been there before. The twins found the old dog, whose name, they learned from one of the remaining ranch hands, was Jester. The animal was ancient and mostly deaf, but he tolerated their attention with dignified patience. Having something to care for seemed to wake them up a little. They started talking more, playing more. Iris kept the house running. Meals appeared on time. Clothes got mended. The place started feeling less like a tomb. And slowly, reluctantly, Caleb Mercer began thawing. He still didn't talk much, but he stopped disappearing immediately after meals. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch for a few minutes while Iris cleaned up. Sometimes he'd answer when the children asked questions. One evening, Marcus asked him about the cattle. "Why do they have those marks?" "Brands," Caleb said. "Shows who owns them." "Why?" "Because otherwise someone could steal them and claim they were theirs." "Has anyone tried to steal yours?" Caleb's expression darkened slightly. "Not yet." But the way he said it made Iris think it was only a matter of time. She'd been hearing things in town. The mercantile owner wasn't the only one who'd warned her about Vernon Pike. The few ranch hands who still worked for Caleb mentioned him constantly, always in the context of lost land, ruined neighbors, and violence that somehow never got investigated. Pike wanted Mercer Ranch. Everyone knew it. The question wasn't if he'd make a move, just when. Right. 3 weeks after they arrived, reality hit. Iris had taken the wagon into Hollow Creek for supplies. Delia came with her because the girl needed new shoes and Iris wanted company. They'd just finished loading flour and beans when 3 men approached. They weren't from town. Iris recognized the type immediately. Hired muscle, the kind of men who got paid to scare people. They moved with practiced menace and wore guns like accessories. The largest one stepped directly into her path. "You're Mercer's woman." It wasn't a question. Iris kept her voice steady. "I work for Mr. Mercer, yes." "You tell him Vernon Pike wants to talk. Business proposition. He's being stupid turning it down." "I'll pass along the message." The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "You do that. And tell him time's running out. Mr. Pike's been real patient, but patience don't last forever." He leaned closer. Iris smelled whiskey and tobacco. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be stuck on a dying ranch with a man who can barely take care of himself. Maybe you should think about better options. I'm fine where I am. For now." The man straightened. "But things change. Ranches fail. Accidents happen. You seem smart enough to see which way the wind's blowing." They walked away laughing. Iris stood there with her heart hammering and Delia's small hand gripping her skirt. Several people had watched the confrontation from shop doorways, but nobody had intervened. Nobody ever did when Pike's men were involved. She finished loading the wagon in silence and drove back to the ranch faster than was safe. Caleb was in the barn when she arrived. She told him what happened, everything, word for word. He listened without expression. "That's Pike's standard approach," he said when she finished. "Intimidation first, then escalation." "What happens when he escalates?" "Depends how far he wants to push it. And if he pushes all the way," Caleb looked at her directly, "then people get hurt." The bluntness should have scared her. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said in weeks. "Why does he want your land so badly?" "Water." Caleb walked to the barn door and pointed toward the eastern ridge. There's an underground spring that runs through that area. It's one of the last reliable sources for miles. Pike controls most of the water rights in the territory. If he gets this ranch, he controls everything. So why not sell? Why risk? Because if I sell, everyone else loses. Caleb's voice was flat. Pike will charge whatever he wants for water access. Small ranchers will go bankrupt. Hollow Creek will die completely. I might survive selling, but everyone around me won't. Iris absorbed that. So you're fighting him for other people? I'm fighting him because someone has to. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like choosing to stand alone against a man with money, guns, and corrupted law was just common sense. Iris realized something then. Caleb Mercer wasn't suicidal. He was principled in a way that frontier life usually beat out of people, and that made him dangerous to men like Vernon Pike. It also made him incredibly vulnerable. "What do you need?" she asked. Caleb frowned. "What?" "To fight him. What do you need?" "I don't need anything. This isn't your problem. I'm living here. I'm feeding your house. Those children are sleeping under your roof. That makes it my problem." They stared at each other. For the first time since she'd arrived, something like respect flickered in Caleb's eyes. "More hands," he said finally. "Workers who'll stay even when things get bad. But I can't pay enough to compete with Pike, and most men know working here means making an enemy of him. What about workers who don't care about money, who are just looking for a place to belong? You talking about drifters? I'm talking about people like us. People who've got nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose." Caleb considered that. "Where would we find them?" "Hollow Creek's full of families on the edge. I heard at least 5 businesses closed this month. People are desperate. If we offer them work, housing, meals, if we offer them community instead of just wages, some might come. That's charity, not business. Maybe, but maybe that's exactly what breaks Pike's hold. He rules through fear and money. We build something different. That's naive." "Probably," Iris agreed. "But what else have you got?" Caleb almost smiled. "Almost. I'll think about it." That night, Iris couldn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the wind rattle the windows and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The smart thing would be to leave. Take the children somewhere safer, find work in a bigger town where men like Vernon Pike didn't control everything. But where exactly would that be? She'd already run halfway across the country trying to outpace grief and disaster. There wasn't another frontier waiting beyond this one. There was just more running, more uncertainty, more watching the children lose pieces of themselves every time they had to start over. At some point, you had to stop running and dig in, even if the ground beneath you was cursed. The next morning, she made a decision. She took the wagon back into Hollow Creek, alone this time, and started asking questions. She talked to the mercantile owner, the woman who ran the boarding house, the farrier, the pastor. She asked who'd lost work recently, who had families, who might be desperate enough to take a risk on something that sounded impossible. By afternoon, she had 6 names. By sunset, she'd talked to 4 of them. 2 said yes immediately. 1 said maybe. The last one told her she was crazy, but he'd think about it. When she got back to the ranch, Caleb was waiting on the porch. "I talked to people in town," she said before he could ask. "Found 2 workers who'll come if we can house and feed them. Maybe a 3rd. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "You didn't have permission to do that." "I didn't think I needed permission to help. You don't speak for this ranch." "Then fire me." Iris climbed down from the wagon and faced him directly. "Fire me and send us back to nothing. Or accept that I'm trying to keep this place alive because those children in your house need it to survive, and I won't watch them lose another home." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he walked past her to start unhitching the horses. "Tell them they can start Monday," he said without looking back. Iris stood there feeling something she hadn't felt in months, like maybe she'd done something right. The new workers arrived within the week. Tom Breslin was a former miner whose lungs had given out. He couldn't work underground anymore, but could still handle livestock and repairs. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he'd been drifting since. Samuel Cross was younger, barely 20, with a club foot that made most ranchers pass him over. But he could read, write, and had a head for numbers that Caleb immediately put to use organizing accounts. The third man, Jacob Reeves, showed up 3 days later. He'd lost his farm to Pike 6 months earlier and had been working odd jobs ever since. He was angry, bitter, and looking for any chance to hit back at the man who'd ruined him. Caleb put them to work immediately. Tom took over most of the fence repairs. Samuel started organizing the ranch's chaotic financial records. Jacob joined Caleb and Emmett moving cattle and slowly rebuilding the herd through careful trading. The ranch began changing, not drastically, not magically, but enough that you could feel the difference. There were more voices at meals, more lights in the bunkhouse after dark, more laughter occasionally breaking through the constant work. Emmett blossomed under the attention of men who actually talked to him. He started gaining weight, building muscle, walking with more confidence. He still had nightmares. Iris heard him sometimes through the thin walls, but they were getting less frequent. Delia's garden started producing. Not much at first, just scraggly tomatoes and struggling beans. But it was life coming out of dead soil, and that meant something. The twins attached themselves to Jester and started exploring further from the house. They found lizards, interesting rocks, bird nests. They started laughing again. And Iris stopped waiting for everything to collapse. Not because she believed it wouldn't, but because she realized she was tired of living like disaster was the only possible future. If this fell apart, she'd survive it. They all would. But until then, she was going to build something worth losing. Late one evening, she found Caleb on the porch staring at the darkened landscape. She sat down beside him without asking permission. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting us stay. For giving Emmett work. For not throwing us out when you realized I'd lied about the children." Caleb was quiet for a while. "You didn't lie. You just didn't tell me everything. Is there a difference?" "Sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence. The wind moved through the scrub brush. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Jester snored on the other end of the porch. "My wife's name was Sarah," Caleb said suddenly. "She died giving birth 4 years ago. The baby, a boy, lived maybe 2 hours. Doctor said there wasn't anything he could have done differently, but I've never believed that." Iris didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty comfort, just listened. "This ranch was supposed to be for them," Caleb continued. "Build something permanent, raise a family, all the things you're supposed to want." He laughed bitterly. "After they died, I couldn't leave. Felt like if I abandoned this place, I'd be abandoning them. So I stayed and worked and pretended that was the same as living." "Is it?" "No." He looked at her. "But I didn't know what else to do until you showed up with those children and started fixing things I didn't even know were broken." Iris felt something shift between them. Not romance, nothing that simple or easy, but recognition. The kind that happens when two people who've survived impossible things realize they don't have to survive alone anymore. "They're not just my children," she said quietly. "They're orphans. Their parents died and I took them because nobody else would. I'm terrified every day that I'll fail them, that I'm not enough, that I'll make the wrong choice and they'll pay for it." "You're doing fine. I'm barely keeping them together." "That's what parenting is." Caleb's voice was rough. "Barely keeping them together until they're strong enough to keep themselves together. You're doing better than most." Iris felt tears building and forced them back. She hadn't cried since Margaret's funeral, couldn't afford to. Crying meant admitting how scared she was, and fear was a luxury she didn't have. But sitting here in the dark with a man who understood loss in ways most people didn't, she almost let herself break. Almost. Instead, she stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Good night, Mr. Mercer." "Caleb," he said. "You can call me Caleb." It was such a small thing, just a name, but it felt like permission for something larger. "Good night, Caleb." She went inside before he could see her cry. The first real trouble came on a Tuesday. Iris was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching fast. Too fast. The kind of speed that meant either emergency or hostility, and out here those were often the same thing. She wiped flour from her hands and moved to the window. 6 riders coming up the road, dust trailing behind them like smoke. She recognized the lead horse, a big roan gelding that belonged to Vernon Pike's foreman, a man named Durst, who had a reputation for cruelty that extended beyond livestock. Caleb was out on the North Range with Emmett and Jacob. Tom and Samuel were repairing the barn roof. The only people in the house were Iris, Delia, and the twins. She grabbed the rifle from above the door. "Delia," she called without taking her eyes off the approaching riders. "Take Marcus and Bess upstairs. Stay in the back bedroom and don't come out until I tell you. And Iris, now." The girl herded the twins up the stairs. Iris heard the bedroom door close. Then she stepped onto the porch with the rifle held loose across her body, not aimed, but ready. The riders pulled up in the yard. Durst stayed mounted. He was a thick man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that calculated violence as casually as other men calculated prices. "Mrs. Vane," he touched his hat mockingly. "Didn't expect to find you armed. Didn't expect uninvited visitors. This ain't a social call," Durst gestured to the men behind him. "Mr. Pike sent us to deliver a message to Mercer. Since he ain't here, you'll do." "I'm listening." "Mr. Pike's made Mercer a final offer, $12,000 for this property. That's more than fair considering the condition things are in. He's got 3 days to accept." "And if he doesn't?" Durst smiled. It was the expression of a man who enjoyed his work. "Then Mr. Pike will be forced to pursue other options, legal ones, of course. Turns out there's some questions about Mercer's water rights, some old territorial claims that might need reviewing, could tie this place up in court for years, cost more money than Mercer's got to fight it. That's theft dressed up in legal language." "That's business, ma'am. Now, you seem like a smart woman, practical. Maybe you could talk some sense into Mercer before he makes a mistake that costs him everything." Iris kept her voice level. "I'll pass along your message." "You do that." Durst leaned forward in his saddle. "And maybe think about your own situation while you're at it. Those children you brought here, they deserve better than watching this place get torn apart. Mr. Pike's a generous man. He might be willing to help you relocate. Set you up somewhere safer. We're fine where we are. For now." Durst straightened. "But you should know, accidents happen on failing ranches. Equipment breaks. Fires start. People get hurt. It'd be a shame if something happened to those kids because their guardian was too stubborn to see reason." The threat hung in the air like poison. Tom and Samuel had stopped working on the barn roof. They stood frozen, hammers in hand, watching the confrontation. Neither of them moved to help. Iris didn't blame them. 6 armed men against 3 unarmed workers, and a woman with a rifle she'd probably never fired at a person. The math didn't favor intervention. "I think you should leave now," Iris said. Durst laughed. "Yes, ma'am, we're going, but you remember what I said, 3 days." They turned their horses and rode out at the same leisurely pace they'd arrived with, like they had all the time in the world and knew it. Iris stood on the porch until they disappeared from sight. Then she set the rifle down and gripped the porch rail because her hands were shaking so badly she didn't trust them. Tom climbed down from the barn roof and approached carefully. "You all right, Mrs. Vane?" "Fine. That was Durst. He's—" "I know who he is." Iris took a breath and steadied herself. "When Caleb gets back, tell him I need to speak with him immediately." She went inside before Tom could respond. Delia was already coming down the stairs with the twins clinging to her. "Who were those men?" Delia asked. "Nobody important." "They looked important." "They looked dangerous. There's a difference." Iris pulled the girl into a brief hug. "Everything's fine. Go back to whatever you were doing." But nothing was fine, and they both knew it. Caleb returned just before sunset. Iris met him in the barn while he was unsaddling his horse. She told him everything, word for word, tone for tone. His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on the saddle leather. 3 days, he said flatly. That's what he said. Durst threatened the children? Not directly, but the implication was clear enough. Caleb finished removing the saddle and set it on the rack with deliberate care. Then he turned to face her. "You should take them and leave." Iris stared at him. "Excuse me? This is going to get worse. Pike's moving from intimidation to action. When that happens, people get hurt. I won't have those children caught in the middle of it." "Where exactly do you suggest we go?" "Anywhere. Back east. Another territory. I'll give you money." "I don't want your money." Iris felt anger rising, hot and unexpected. "You think we haven't been run off before? You think we haven't already lost everything once? Running doesn't fix anything. It just means you lose on someone else's terms instead of your own. This isn't your fight. I'm standing in your house with 4 children sleeping upstairs. That makes it my fight whether you like it or not." They stared at each other across the dim barn. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Iris's expression stopped him. "You're stubborn," he said finally. "I'm practical. There's a difference." "Not much of one." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Pike's going to push this to violence. You understand that? He'll burn the fields, scatter the cattle, maybe worse. I've seen what his men do to people who don't cooperate. So have I. My brother-in-law lost his farm to men just like Pike. Different territory, same tactics. It killed him as surely as a bullet would have." Iris stepped closer. "You can't fight him alone. You know that, right? Whatever you're planning, it won't be enough." "I'm not planning anything. I'm just not selling." "That's not a strategy. That's just waiting to get destroyed." "You got a better idea?" Iris had been thinking about this since Durst left, turning it over in her mind, looking at it from every angle. "We make this ranch mean something to more people. We expand, bring in more workers, more families. Make this place big enough that destroying it becomes harder than leaving it alone. That takes money I don't have. It takes organization and planning. The money comes after." She could see him starting to dismiss the idea and pushed harder. "Pike controls this territory through isolation. He picks off ranchers one at a time because they're alone and vulnerable. But if we build something bigger, if we create a community instead of just a ranch, then attacking us means attacking everyone. That changes the equation." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about turning this place into something like a cooperative." "I'm talking about survival. Call it whatever you want." "It won't work. People out here don't trust each other enough for something like that. They don't trust Pike either. Fear's a powerful motivator, but so is hope. We give them an alternative, and some of them will take it. And when Pike retaliates, we deal with it together. That's the point." Caleb studied her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Probably both." Iris managed a tired smile. "But I'm right, and you know it." He didn't confirm or deny it, just nodded once and walked past her toward the house. She followed, and they ate dinner in the usual tense silence while the children watched them both with wary eyes. After the children went to bed, Caleb pulled out a map of the territory and spread it across the kitchen table. Iris sat across from him while he marked property lines, water sources, and the locations of neighboring ranches. "If we're going to do this," he said, "we need to move fast. Pike gave us 3 days, which means he's planning something for day 4. We need to be ready." "Ready how?" "More people, more eyes, more hands to deal with whatever he throws at us." Caleb tapped 3 locations on the map. "These are the closest ranches that haven't sold to Pike yet. Small operations, barely surviving. If we can convince them to work together, pool resources, share water access, coordinate defense, then we've got a chance. Will they listen? Probably not, but we have to try." They worked late into the night, planning routes, drafting proposals, calculating resources. It felt surreal sitting at this table with a man she'd known for barely a month, plotting resistance against forces that had crushed stronger people than them, but it also felt right. Around midnight, Iris finally stood to head upstairs. Caleb caught her wrist gently. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For staying, for not running when you had the chance." He released her hand. "Sarah would have liked you. She had the same kind of stubbornness." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife without pain threading through every word. Iris took that as progress. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." That turned out to be an understatement. They started before dawn, riding out to the 3 nearest ranches with Tom and Jacob as backup. Samuel stayed behind to watch the property and keep the children safe. The first ranch belonged to a widow named Clara Morton, who ran the place with her 2 teenage sons. Her husband had died in a riding accident 2 years earlier, and she'd been holding on through sheer willpower since. Pike had made offers before. She'd refused every time, but Iris could see the desperation around the edges. Fences falling apart, cattle too thin, the house showing signs of serious neglect. Clara met them on the porch with a shotgun. "I ain't selling, Mercer. Don't care what Pike's offering now." "I'm not here to buy," Caleb said. "I'm here to propose something different." He explained the plan: shared resources, cooperative defense, pooled labor during critical seasons. In exchange, Mercer Ranch would provide access to their water source and help with immediate repairs. Clara listened with narrowed eyes. When Caleb finished, she was quiet for a long time. You're talking about starting a war with Pike. I'm talking about surviving him. Those are the same thing. Maybe. But at least this way we're fighting back instead of just waiting to be picked off. Clara looked at Iris. This your idea? Parts of it, Iris admitted. You got children with you at Mercer Ranch? 4. And you're willing to risk them on this? I'm willing to risk them on building something worth protecting. What I'm not willing to do is teach them that running away is the only option when powerful men try to take what's yours. Claire's expression softened slightly. My boys are 15 and 17. They work hard, but they're still learning. This thing goes bad. Pike could destroy us all. He's going to destroy us anyway if we don't work together, Caleb said, one by one, until there's nobody left who remembers when this territory wasn't under his control. The widow studied them both. Then she lowered the shotgun. I'll think about it. Give me 2 days. We don't have 2 days. Pike's deadline is 3 days out, and we need to be ready before then. Then I guess you better hope I think fast. Clara stepped back inside and closed the door. They tried the second ranch with similar results. Cautious interest, deep fear, and a request for time nobody had. The third rancher, an older man named Dutch Carver, threw them off his property entirely. You're insane, Mercer. Pike'll crush this little rebellion before it starts, and I ain't going down with you. By the time they got back to Mercer Ranch, Iris felt the weight of failure settling heavy in her chest. 2 maybes and 1 outright rejection wasn't enough to build anything on. But that night, something unexpected happened. Clara Morton showed up with her sons and 2 wagons full of belongings. We're in, she said simply. Figure if we're going to lose everything anyway, might as well lose it fighting. She wasn't alone. The second rancher, a taciturn man named Henry Birch, arrived an hour later with his wife and daughter. Then came 2 families from town who'd lost their businesses to Pike's economic strangling and had nowhere left to go. By morning, Mercer Ranch had 15 new people and a half-dozen children running around the yard like they owned the place. It was chaos. Iris threw herself into organization with a ferocity that surprised even her. She assigned sleeping quarters, coordinated meal preparation, established work schedules, and somehow kept track of which children belonged to which parents. The house became a constant flow of activity, women cooking, men repairing equipment, children playing in supervised groups while adults worked. Delia took charge of the younger kids naturally, organizing games and keeping them out from underfoot. Emmett worked alongside Caleb and the other men like he'd been born to it. Even the twins seemed to thrive in the noise and chaos, finally looking like actual children instead of scared ghosts. But the clock was still ticking. Pike's 3-day deadline approached like a storm on the horizon. On the second day, they had a planning meeting in the barn. All the adults, everyone who'd thrown their lot in with this desperate gamble. Caleb stood at the front with the territory map spread on a makeshift table. Pike's going to hit us, he said without preamble. We don't know when or how, but it's coming. We need to be ready. Ready how? Clara asked. We're ranchers and shopkeepers, not soldiers. We don't need to be soldiers. We just need to be prepared. Caleb pointed to key locations on the map. We set up watches, rotate people through the night in shifts, keep weapons accessible but hidden from the children. If anything suspicious happens, we sound the alarm and everyone moves to defensive positions. What kind of defensive positions? Henry Birch looked skeptical. The house? The barn? Pike's got enough men to surround this whole place. He does. But he's also got a reputation to maintain. If he comes at us with overwhelming force against women and children, that makes him look weak. He'll try something more subtle first, sabotage maybe, or targeted destruction meant to scare us off. And if that doesn't work? Clara's younger son asked. Caleb's expression hardened. Then it gets worse, but we deal with each problem as it comes. They spent the next several hours discussing contingencies, assigning responsibilities, and preparing as best they could for threats they couldn't fully anticipate. Iris watched the group dynamics carefully. Some people were committed, others scared, but determined. A few looked like they were already regretting their choice. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house full of people. Footsteps on the stairs, whispered conversations, someone's baby crying briefly before being soothed. The ranch had gone from silent tomb to living community in a matter of days. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to fall. The deadline came and went without incident. 1 day passed, then 2. Everyone stayed tense, waiting for retaliation that didn't come. Some people started to relax. Maybe Pike had backed down. Maybe the show of solidarity had been enough. Iris knew better. Men like Vernon Pike didn't back down. They just changed tactics. The attack came on a Sunday, during the hottest part of the afternoon, when most people were resting inside to escape the brutal sun. Someone had cut the fence on the south pasture during the previous night. The cattle had wandered through the gap, scattering across miles of open range. By the time anyone noticed, half the herd was gone. Caleb organized a search party immediately. Every able-bodied man and several of the women rode out to round up the scattered animals. Iris stayed behind with a handful of people to watch the children and guard the ranch buildings. That's when the second part of the attack came. Iris was in the kitchen preparing an early supper when she smelled smoke. Not cooking smoke, burning hay and wood. She ran outside and saw flames rising from the northern storage shed, the one containing winter feed supplies, spare equipment, and crucial reserves they'd need to survive the coming season. "Fire!" she screamed. People poured out of buildings. Claire and her older son grabbed buckets and ran toward the well. Henry Birch started organizing a bucket line. Iris herded the children away from the flames and did a quick head count. 23 people accounted for, 24 on the property. Someone was missing. "Where's Delia?" she shouted. Nobody knew. Iris's heart stopped. She ran toward the burning shed, screaming the girl's name. The heat was already intense, flames consuming the wooden structure with horrifying speed. Then she saw movement near the back of the building. A small figure struggling with something heavy. Delia had gone in to save the seed stores. The girl was dragging a heavy sack toward the door, coughing from smoke inhalation, moving far too slowly. Flames licked at the walls around her. The roof was starting to collapse. Iris didn't think. She grabbed a wet blanket someone had dropped, threw it over her head, and ran into the burning building. The heat was overwhelming. Smoke choked her lungs. She could barely see through the flames and darkness. But she found Delia by the sound of her coughing, grabbed the girl with one hand and the sack with the other, and hauled them both toward the door. A beam fell behind them. Part of the roof caved in ahead. They weren't going to make it. Then hands grabbed them from outside. Tom and Henry dragged them clear just as the rest of the structure collapsed inward with a roar of flame and destruction. Iris lay on the ground coughing, her lungs burning, still gripping Delia's arm. The girl was crying, soot-stained and terrified. "I'm sorry," Delia sobbed. "I just wanted to save the seeds. I thought—" "Shh. It's okay. You're okay." Iris pulled her close, ignoring the pain in her own lungs. "Don't ever do that again. You hear me? Nothing in that shed was worth your life." The fire burned itself out eventually, leaving nothing but a charred skeleton where the storage shed had been. They'd lost most of their winter feed reserves, half their spare equipment, and crucial supplies they couldn't easily replace. It was a devastating blow. But it could have been so much worse. That night, after the ashes cooled and the damage was assessed, Caleb called another meeting. "This was Pike," he said. Everyone knew it, but hearing it stated plainly made it real. "He's escalating. The fence cutting was a distraction. The fire was the real attack. He's going after our ability to survive winter." "So what do we do?" Clara asked. She looked exhausted, her face streaked with soot. "We rebuild. We pool what resources we have left. We send people to town for supplies, and we prepare for the next attack." "There's going to be a next attack." One of the women from town sounded terrified. "Yes," Caleb said flatly. "Pike's not done. This was just a warning shot." "Maybe we should reconsider," Henry Birch said quietly. "Maybe this isn't worth—" "Worth what?" Iris interrupted. She stood up, her voice rough from smoke inhalation but steady. "Losing everything you own? Having your children grow up knowing you surrendered to a bully because fighting back was too hard? Because that's what leaving now means." "It means staying alive," Henry shot back. "It means living on your knees." Iris looked around the room at tired, scared faces. "I understand the fear. I'm scared too. Those are my children sleeping upstairs, and I'm terrified something will happen to them. But here's what I know. Vernon Pike wins because people like us give up. He wins because we're divided and desperate and willing to accept whatever scraps he throws us, as long as he leaves us alone. But what if we stop accepting that? What if we make him work for it? He'll crush us, someone muttered. Maybe. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have shown our children that some things are worth fighting for. She paused. My niece almost died today saving seed stores because she understood something fundamental. You can't build a future without planting something first. She was willing to risk herself for that. Are we really going to do less? The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. People weighing risks against possibilities, fear against determination. Finally, Clara stood. I'm staying, she said. My boys are staying. We've got nothing left to go back to anyway. One by one, others stood. Not everyone. 2 families decided to leave the next morning, and Iris didn't blame them. Fear was rational. Self-preservation made sense. But most stayed. And that night, for the first time since they'd all gathered at Mercer Ranch, Iris felt like they might actually have a chance. Not a good chance. Not even a fair one. But a chance. Caleb found her later, sitting on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. He sat down beside her without speaking. That was quite a speech, he said eventually. It was desperate rambling. It worked. For now. Iris rubbed her eyes. They still burned from the smoke. How long do you think we can hold out? Against Pike? Not long. Maybe through winter if we're lucky and careful. And after that? I don't know. Caleb leaned back against the porch rail. This whole thing might be doomed from the start. Pike has more money, more men, more power. We're just trying. Trying's better than surrendering. Is it? He sounded genuinely uncertain. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm leading all these people into disaster because I'm too stubborn to admit when I'm beaten? Iris looked at him, really looked, saw the doubt and exhaustion written across his face. This man who projected such strength was cracking under the weight of responsibility. You're not leading them into anything, she said. They chose this. We all did. And yeah, it might end badly. Most things do. But at least we're choosing our own ending instead of letting Pike write it for us. I don't want anyone else to die because of choices I made. Then make better choices. Fight smarter. Ask for help when you need it. She paused and stopped carrying everything alone. That's why you have people now. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, just once. They sat together in comfortable silence while the night deepened around them, and somewhere in the darkness, Vernon Pike's next move was already being planned. The next attack came 5 days later, and it was worse than fire. Iris woke before dawn to shouting. She grabbed her robe and ran downstairs to find Tom Breslin standing in the kitchen with blood running down his face. They jumped me on the road back from town, he said through split lips. 3 of them. Beat me pretty good and told me to deliver a message. Caleb was already there, helping Tom into a chair. What message? Pike says this is your last chance. Sell now or he starts hurting people permanently. Said next time it won't be just a beating. Tom winced as Iris pressed a wet cloth to the gash above his eye. They meant it, Caleb. Durst was there. He's not playing games anymore. The room filled with people as word spread. Women in nightgowns, men pulling on boots, children peering around doorways with frightened eyes. The sense of safety they'd been carefully building shattered in an instant. We should leave, someone said. Iris didn't see who. Where? Clara demanded. You think Pike won't find us if we scatter? At least here we're together. Together in targets, Henry Birch muttered. Caleb stood. Everyone needs to calm down. Tom, you need a doctor? I've had worse. That's not what I asked. Tom shook his head. I'll be fine. But those men weren't bluffing. They're ready to escalate. So are we. Caleb's voice carried an edge Iris hadn't heard before. We knew this was coming. We planned for it. Now we execute. Execute what? Henry challenged. We're not fighters. Half of us don't even know how to shoot properly. Then we learn. Fast. Caleb looked around the room. Anyone who wants to leave, go now. I won't stop you and I won't judge you. But if you stay, you're committed. No more second guessing. No more panic. We work together or we die apart. The silence stretched thin. Then Clara's older son spoke up. I can shoot. Pa taught me before he died. I can teach others. I did some hunting back east, another man offered. Not people, but I know my way around a rifle. Slowly, reluctantly, people began volunteering skills. It wasn't much.
A few good shots, some men who'd been in bar fights, women who'd defended homesteads before, but it was something. Iris pulled Caleb aside while others were talking. "This is going to get someone killed," she said quietly. "I know. The children are safer here than running. Pike's men will hunt down anyone who leaves. At least here we can watch each other's backs."
That's not a plan. That's just hoping for the best. Caleb looked at her directly. You got a better option? Because I'm open to suggestions. Iris didn't have one. That was the problem. Every path forward led through violence or capitulation, and capitulation meant losing everything anyway. We need leverage, she said finally. Something Pike wants more than he wants to hurt us. There's nothing he wants more than this land. Then we make it worthless to him. An idea was forming, dangerous and half crazy. The water source, the underground spring. What if we could cut off access to it? Make it so even if he gets the land, he can't get the water. Caleb stared at her. That would destroy the ranch too. Better we destroy it than let him profit from it. You're talking about collapsing the spring entirely. I'm talking about making sure Pike understands he can't win. Not really. He can take the land, but the thing that makes it valuable disappears with us. Iris knew how insane it sounded. It's mutually assured destruction. We can't use it as a threat unless we're willing to follow through. And are you? Willing to destroy the only water source for miles? Iris thought about the children sleeping upstairs, about the families who'd trusted her and Caleb enough to stay, about what defeat would mean for all of them. If it's the difference between Pike controlling everything and everyone having nothing, then yes, at least nothing's fair. Caleb studied her like she'd grown a second head. Then he laughed, short and bitter. You're crazier than I am. Probably, but I'm right. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly. We'd need to map the entire spring system, figure out where the source is and how to collapse it without killing anyone in the process. Delia found moisture patterns in the garden. She might be able to help trace the water flow. She's 9 years old. She's observant and smart. And right now we need both more than we need traditional expertise. Caleb rubbed his face, exhaustion evident in every line. This is insane. Everything about this situation is insane. We're just choosing which kind of insanity to embrace. By sunrise, they had a plan. Dangerous, desperate, and likely to fail. But at least it was something other than waiting to be picked apart. Delia took to the task with unexpected enthusiasm. She spent the next 2 days walking the property with a notebook, marking wet spots, observing where plants grew better, noting changes in soil color. Caleb followed her with surveying equipment borrowed from town, mapping elevations and plotting underground channels. Iris watched them work and felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. Her 9-year-old niece was helping plan the potential destruction of an entire water system because that's what survival required now. Meanwhile, the men started defensive preparations. They built reinforced positions around key buildings, stockpiled supplies, and began weapons training for anyone who didn't know how. Clara turned out to be a surprisingly good shot. Henry's wife could load and fire faster than most of the men. Even some of the older children learned basic safety and handling. It felt like preparing for war, because that's exactly what it was. On the third day, Emmett came to Iris while she was helping organize ammunition supplies. "I want to learn to fight," he said. "You're 11. I'm almost 12, and I'm not letting someone hurt this family again." His face was set with determination that looked wrong on someone so young. "I couldn't save Ma and Pa, but I can help here." Iris wanted to tell him no. Wanted to protect him from this. But she'd learned in the past months that protection was a luxury children like Emmett couldn't afford. "You learn from Caleb," she said finally. "Nobody else. And you follow every safety rule exactly. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." He ran off before she could change her mind. Iris watched him go and felt something inside her crack a little more. These children should have been playing, learning to read, worrying about normal things. Instead, they were learning to shoot and preparing for violence because the world had decided their survival wasn't guaranteed. That night, Vernon Pike himself showed up, not with guns or threats. He arrived in a fine carriage with 2 men as escort, dressed like he was attending a social function instead of visiting a ranch he'd been terrorizing for weeks. Caleb met him in the yard. Iris stood on the porch with the rifle, making sure Pike saw it.
The rest of the adults positioned themselves visibly around the property. A show of force that was probably meaningless but felt necessary anyway.
Pike was a large man, well-fed in a way that spoke of wealth and excess. He had the kind of face that smiled easily, but never with warmth. Everything about him radiated confidence and controlled menace. "Mercer," he said pleasantly, "we need to talk." "Nothing to talk about. I'm not selling." "Yes, you've made that clear. Very dramatically, I might add." Pike gestured at the assembled people. "All these families, very touching, but ultimately pointless. We're done here." Caleb started to turn away. "I could destroy you tomorrow," Pike said conversationally. "You understand that? I have 30 men who'd burn this place to the ground if I gave the order. The law wouldn't do a thing because I own the law in 3 counties. Then why haven't you?" "Because I'm a reasonable man, and because wholesale slaughter is bad for business." Pike's smile didn't waver. "But my patience has limits, so I'm going to make you one final offer. 20,000 for the land. That's almost double the previous offer. Plus, I'll ensure safe passage and relocation assistance for everyone here. You all get to leave intact and with money in your pockets." "And if we refuse, then I stop being reasonable." Pike's expression finally hardened. "I'll tie this land up in legal disputes that'll take years to resolve. I'll make sure no one in the territory will do business with you. Your cattle will mysteriously die. Your supplies will get lost in transit. And yes, eventually, accidents will happen to people, because that's what happens when folks refuse reality." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's something you should know about the water source you want so badly." "Oh?" "It's fragile. The spring system runs through limestone formations that are already partially collapsed. Wouldn't take much to bring the whole thing down, make it worthless." Pike's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You willing to bet everything on that assumption?" Caleb gestured toward Delia, who was standing near the well with her notebook. "That girl's been mapping the entire system. We know exactly where to place charges to collapse it permanently. You can take this land by force, but the thing that makes it valuable will be gone. You'd destroy your own water supply. Already planning for it. We've identified alternative sources. It'll be harder, but we'll survive. Can you say the same? How many other ranchers depend on water access they lease from you? What happens when your main source disappears?" Pike's smile faded completely. "That's suicide." "It's insurance," Iris called from the porch. "You can have the land or you can have our cooperation. You can't have both." Pike looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Who are you?" "Someone who's tired of men like you taking everything and leaving scraps." She descended the porch steps, rifle still in hand. "You want to play the long game? Fine. We'll play too, but understand this. We've got nothing left to lose. That makes us a lot more dangerous than you're used to dealing with." The calculation in Pike's eyes was visible. He was weighing options, measuring risks. Men like him were used to winning through intimidation and economic pressure. Actual mutually assured destruction wasn't something they encountered often. Finally, he smiled again. But this time it had teeth. "You're making a mistake," he said pleasantly. "All of you. This territory isn't big enough for this kind of defiance." "Then maybe the territory needs to get bigger," Caleb said. Pike climbed back into his carriage. Before leaving, he looked at Iris directly. "I remember you now. You're the woman who arrived with all those orphans, trying to build a home for them." His voice carried false sympathy. "It's going to be a shame when they watch it all burn down because you were too stubborn to accept a generous offer." He left before Iris could respond. The silence after his departure was suffocating. Everyone had heard the exchange. Everyone understood the stakes had just gotten exponentially higher. "Did we just make things better or worse?" Clara asked. "Yes," Caleb said. That night, Iris couldn't eat. She pushed food around her plate while the children chattered about their day, and the adults made careful small talk that avoided mentioning the obvious. After dinner, she found herself in the garden where Delia had spent so much time over the past months. The plants were thriving despite the harsh conditions. Tomatoes heavy on vines, beans climbing makeshift trellises, herbs spreading in neat rows. It was such a small thing, this garden, but it represented something larger, the possibility of growth in hostile soil. Footsteps approached. Caleb sat on the bench beside her. "You did good today," he said. "I threatened to destroy the only reliable water source in the region." You called Pike's bluff. There's a difference. Was it a bluff? Iris looked at him. Because I meant it. If he pushes us to that point, I'll help you collapse that spring myself. I know, that's what made it effective. Caleb leaned back, staring at the darkening sky. Pike's used to people who value survival above everything. He doesn't know how to deal with people who'd rather destroy what they have than surrender it. That's not strength. That's just desperation. Out here, they're often the same thing. Iris thought about that, about how many desperate choices had led them to this moment, about how many more were probably coming. When I brought the children here, she said quietly, I thought I was saving them, giving them stability and safety and a place to grow up. Now I wonder if I just dragged them into something worse. You gave them a chance. That's more than they had before. A chance at what? Watching adults prepare for violence? Learning to shoot before they learn to read properly? Living in fear that someone's going to hurt them because of decisions we made? Caleb didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. My father used to say that the worst thing you can teach a child is that the world is fair. Because it's not. It's brutal and random, and the people with power usually keep it by stepping on everyone else. He paused. But he also said that doesn't mean you stop fighting for fairness anyway. You fight because the alternative is accepting that might makes right. And if you accept that, you've already lost everything that matters. Your father sounds wise. He was. Pike's men killed him over a property dispute when I was 16. Iris looked at him sharply. I didn't know. Most people don't. It was a long time ago in a different territory. But it taught me something important. Men like Pike don't stop unless someone makes them stop. And sometimes the only way to make them stop is to become something they can't control or predict. Is that what we're doing? Becoming unpredictable? We're becoming willing to sacrifice everything. That's the one thing money can't buy. True commitment to an idea even when it costs you everything. They sat in silence while night fell completely. Somewhere in the house, children laughed. The sound carried across the yard like a promise that life continued even in the face of everything else. The next morning brought unexpected news. Samuel Cross, who'd been handling the ranch's correspondence and paperwork, came running from town with a letter. He was breathless and excited in a way Iris had never seen. You need to read this, he said, shoving the paper at Caleb. It was from the territorial governor's office. Caleb read it twice, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at the assembled group. Someone filed a formal complaint about Pike's business practices. Multiple complaints, actually, from ranchers across 3 counties. There's going to be an investigation into his land acquisition methods and water rights claims. Who filed the complaints? Claire asked. Doesn't say, but it's got enough detail to be taken seriously. They're sending investigators next month. The implications rippled through the group. An official investigation meant Pike would have to be more careful. It didn't stop him, but it constrained him, made blatant violence more risky. This buys us time, Henry said. Maybe enough to survive until spring. Maybe. Caleb folded the letter carefully. Or maybe it makes Pike more desperate. Cornered animals are dangerous. He was right, of course. That evening, Iris was teaching the twins basic arithmetic when Emmett burst through the door. Fire, he gasped. On the South Range, big one. This time, everyone moved with practiced efficiency. The bucket lines formed automatically. People grabbed wet blankets and shovels. Children were hustled to safety. Within minutes, 24 people were racing toward flames that lit up the twilight sky. But when they got there, they realized something was wrong. The fire was burning in a strange pattern, not spreading naturally with the wind, moving in deliberate lines, like someone had poured accelerant in specific paths. It's a trap, Caleb shouted. Everyone back to the... Gunshots cracked through the air, not aimed to kill, aimed to scatter. The group broke apart in panic, people running in different directions. Iris grabbed the twins and dove behind a rock outcropping. More shots, more screaming. Then she saw them. 6 riders silhouetted against the flames, driving cattle toward the broken fence line. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were stealing the herd while everyone was distracted by the fire. They're taking the cattle, she screamed. Caleb heard her. He was already running toward the stables, shouting for anyone who could ride. Tom and Jacob appeared from different directions. Claire's older son, a few others. Iris didn't think. She ran too. You can't ride, Caleb yelled when he saw her. Watch me. There wasn't time to argue. They saddled horses in record time and rode out after the rustlers. The chase went on for miles, across broken terrain in near darkness. Iris had ridden maybe twice in her entire life and clung to the saddle like her life depended on it, because it probably did. The rustlers had a head start, but they were managing nearly 100 cattle. That slowed them. Caleb's group gained ground steadily. Then one of the rustlers turned and fired. The shot went wide, but it spooked the horses. Jacob's mount stumbled and threw him. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Caleb pulled his gun and returned fire, not trying to hit anyone, just forcing them to keep their heads down. They reached the rustlers at a narrow canyon pass where the cattle were bottlenecked. What followed was chaos. Iris saw Caleb grappling with one rider, both of them falling from their horses into the dust. Tom charged another rider who wheeled away at the last second. Someone was shooting, but she couldn't tell who. The cattle were panicking, threatening to stampede in every direction. Then she saw Emmett. The boy had followed them. He was on foot, trying to turn the cattle back toward open range so they wouldn't crush themselves in the canyon. One of the rustlers saw him and rode straight at him. Iris didn't remember dismounting, didn't remember running. She just found herself between Emmett and the charging horse, rifle raised, pulling the trigger. The shot went high, pure luck or divine intervention or just physics. But it made the rider swerve hard. His horse lost footing on loose rock and went down. The rider rolled free and ran, leaving his mount behind. By the time the dust settled, 3 rustlers had fled on foot. 2 were being held at gunpoint by Tom and Clara's son. The rest had escaped into the darkness. The cattle milled in confused groups, but most were there. Jacob was unconscious but alive. Nobody else was seriously hurt. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Iris stood there shaking, rifle hanging loose in her hands, and realized she'd almost killed someone. The man she'd shot at was probably Pike's employee, probably desperate for work like everyone else, probably had family depending on him. She'd almost killed him over cattle. Emmett hugged her suddenly, fierce and tight. "You saved me," he said. "You shouldn't have been there. You should have stayed back with the others. I couldn't let them take everything we've worked for." Iris held him and tried not to cry. This 11-year-old boy had just risked his life for cattle because he understood survival in ways children shouldn't have to. They got everyone back to the ranch as dawn was breaking. Jacob had a concussion but would recover. The 2 captured rustlers were tied up in the barn while Caleb decided what to do with them. The problem was obvious. They had no law to turn to. The sheriff was in Pike's pocket. Taking prisoners meant either letting them go or dealing with them outside legal channels. Neither option was good. Caleb questioned them while the sun rose. "Who sent you?" The older one, a lean man with a scar across his jaw, just stared at the floor. "Was it Pike?" "Nothing." "You could at least confirm what we already know." The younger rustler finally spoke. "We were just hired for the job. Didn't ask questions. That's how it works." "Who hired you?" "Man named Durst. Paid us $50 to scatter your cattle and make it look like they wandered off natural. The fire was supposed to keep everyone busy." "Where's Durst now?" "How should I know? We were supposed to meet him 10 miles south to split the payment. Now we're here instead." Caleb looked at Iris. She could see the calculation in his eyes. What to do with prisoners when law and justice had parted ways? "Let them go," she said. Everyone stared at her. "They're hired hands like us, just trying to survive." Iris looked at the prisoners. "You tell Pike and Durst that next time people will get hurt, and tell them we're not running. They want this land, they'll have to kill us for it. Make sure they understand that." The scarred man met her eyes. "You're serious?" "Completely." They released the prisoners with no horses and no weapons. Made them walk back toward town in the growing heat. It was a small mercy that might come back to haunt them. But Iris couldn't bring herself to escalate further. Not yet. The rest of the morning was spent assessing damage. The fire had burned several acres before they'd contained it. The cattle that were driven off had been recovered, but they were scattered and exhausted. Jacob needed rest. Everyone needed rest. But there wasn't time for that. Because that afternoon, a rider came from Hollow Creek with news that changed everything. Pike had bought the mercantile, and the boarding house, and 2 other businesses. He was systematically purchasing every source of supplies in town. Anyone associated with Mercer Ranch was no longer welcome to trade there. The siege had begun. Iris stared at the messenger like he'd just announced the end of the world. In a way, He had.
What do you mean we can't buy supplies? The young man shifted uncomfortably. He was maybe 17, worked at the mercantile for wages barely enough to survive. Mr. Pike bought out Harding yesterday, paid 3 times what the place was worth. First thing he did was post a notice. No service to anyone from Mercer Ranch or associated properties. Same at the boarding house, the feed store, everywhere he owns now.
That's half the town, Clara said. More like 2/3. He's been buying places up for weeks. We just didn't realize it was all connected. The messenger looked at Caleb. I'm sorry. Mr. Harding wanted you to know before you wasted a trip into town. Said he didn't have a choice about selling. Pike made it clear what would happen if he refused. Caleb paid the young man for his trouble and sent him away. Then he turned to face the assembled group in the yard. The news had spread fast. People were already calculating what this meant. We've got maybe 6 weeks of supplies if we ration carefully, Samuel said. He'd been tracking their inventory obsessively since the fire. Less if we have a hard winter. Can we trade with ranches further out? Henry asked. Maybe. But Pike will know if we try. He'll make sure word spreads that anyone who helps us becomes his next target. Caleb's voice was flat. This is the squeeze. He's cutting off our access to everything we need, forcing us to either surrender or starve. There has to be something we can do, Delia said. The girl had been listening from the porch with her notebook clutched to her chest. Some way to get supplies without going through him.
Like what? Clara's younger son scoffed. Rob a supply wagon? That makes us criminals. We could grow more, Delia insisted. The garden's producing already. If we expand it, plant more. That takes months we don't have, Tom interrupted gently, and winter's coming. Growing season's almost done.
The defeat in everyone's faces was visible. They'd survived the fire, fought off rustlers, stood up to Pike's threats. But you couldn't fight economics. You couldn't shoot your way out of starvation. Iris felt panic rising in her chest. She looked at the children scattered around the yard. Emmett trying to look brave, Delia clutching her notebook, the twins playing with Jester like nothing was wrong. All the other children who'd come here because their families had nowhere else to go. They were going to lose, not dramatically, not in battle. They were going to lose slowly, grinding away week by week until desperation forced them to accept Pike's terms. There might be another option, she heard herself say. Everyone looked at her. The territorial investigators. They're coming next month to look into Pike's business practices. What if we give them something concrete to investigate, something that proves he's breaking the law? Pike owns the law, Henry reminded her. He owns local law. But territorial government is different. They answer to federal oversight, and the federal government cares about territorial stability. Widespread corruption and economic manipulation threatens that stability. Iris was working through the idea even as she spoke. If we can document what he's doing, the coercion, the economic blackmail, the violence, and get that documentation to the investigators before Pike can suppress it, they'll have to act. You're talking about building a case against one of the most powerful men in 3 counties, Caleb said. How exactly do we do that? We talk to everyone he's hurt. We collect testimonies, records, anything that shows a pattern of illegal behavior. We make it impossible for the investigators to ignore even if they wanted to. Pike will kill anyone who testifies against him. Not if it's anonymous. Not if we're careful. Iris looked around at skeptical faces. I know it sounds impossible, but what's our alternative? Sit here and starve? Accept his offer and lose everything anyway? At least this way we're fighting back. The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. People weighing impossible odds against certain defeat. Finally, Clara spoke. I'll talk to other ranchers, quietly. See who else Pike has destroyed who might be willing to share their story. I can reach out to former business owners in town, Samuel offered. Document the coercion and suspicious purchases. Someone needs to track the violence, Tom said, touching his still healing face. Beatings, threats, property damage. Show a pattern that can't be explained away as isolated incidents. Slowly, others volunteered. Not everyone. Some people were too scared or too broken to believe in anything except survival. But enough. Just barely enough to try. They spent the next 3 days organizing the effort. Iris coordinated everything from the kitchen table, which became command center for their desperate intelligence operation. Samuel created a system for cataloging testimonies and evidence. Clara rode out to neighboring ranches under the pretense of social visits. Others made careful inquiries in town. It was dangerous work. Pike had eyes everywhere. One wrong word to the wrong person, and the whole thing would collapse. Meanwhile, the supply situation got worse. They instituted strict rationing. Meals became smaller, simpler. The children complained they were hungry. The adults pretended everything was fine while their own stomachs cramped. Delia's garden helped, but it wasn't nearly enough to feed 30 people. Iris found herself constantly calculating. 3 potatoes split 8 ways. 1 chicken, providing broth for 20. Half a bag of flour stretched across 5 days. The math never worked out right. Someone was always going to bed hungry. On the 4th day, Emmett stopped eating his full portions. "I'm not that hungry," he'd say, pushing food toward the younger children. Iris knew he was lying. The boy was growing. He needed more food, not less. But arguing with him meant taking food from someone else, and there wasn't enough to go around as it was. She caught him alone that evening, skinnier than he'd been a month ago. "You need to eat. So do they." He gestured toward the twins. "They're younger. They need it more." "That's not how it works." "Isn't it?" Emmett's voice was tired beyond his years. "Someone's got to go without." "Might as well be me." Iris wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that they'd figure something out, that no child should have to make that choice. But the words stuck in her throat because she'd been making the same calculations herself. This was what Pike had reduced them to. Not fighting over principles or territory, but fighting over who got to eat enough to survive. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to her stomach complain and thought about Margaret. Her sister would have known what to do. Margaret had always been the practical one, the problem solver. Iris was just the seamstress who'd inherited a situation she had no idea how to fix. A soft knock on her door pulled her from spiraling thoughts. Caleb stood in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too hungry to sleep, too tired to stay awake. Pick your poison." He almost smiled. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She followed him downstairs and out into the cold night. He led her past the barn toward the eastern ridge where Delia had first found signs of underground water. The moon was bright enough to see by, turning the landscape silver and strange. They walked in silence until they reached a rock formation near the ridge's edge. Caleb knelt and brushed away loose dirt, revealing a crack in the stone. "Feel that?" he said. Iris put her hand near the opening. Cool air moved against her skin, carrying the faint smell of water. "This is where the mainspring feeds up from below," Caleb explained. "Delia was right about the whole system. It's more extensive than I thought. Runs under most of the eastern property and beyond." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because if we actually have to collapse it, I want someone else to know where the charges need to be placed." He sat back on his heels. "In case something happens to me." Iris felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You think it's going to come to that?" "I think Pike's not going to stop. The supply embargo is just the beginning. He'll keep squeezing until we're desperate enough to do something stupid. Then he'll use that as justification to come at us with everything he has. So we collapse the spring first, make the land worthless before he can take it." "That's the nuclear option. But yes," Caleb looked at her directly. "Could you do it? If I'm not here and it comes down to that choice, could you actually destroy this?" Iris thought about it honestly, about what it would mean to deliberately cut off water for miles around, the ranches that depended on it, the town barely surviving already. The consequences would ripple outward, hurting innocent people. But then she thought about Pike controlling everything, about what he'd do with that power, about the kind of world her children would inherit if men like him always won. "Yes," she said finally. "If it's the only option left, yes." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'm going to show you and Tom how to set the charges, just in case." They spent the next hour going over technical details Iris only half understood: placement, timing, how much explosive material would be needed. It was surreal planning the destruction of a water source while people slept nearby, unaware of how close they were to losing everything. When they finally headed back, dawn was starting to gray the horizon. "Iris," Caleb said as they reached the house, "if this doesn't work, if we lose, I want you to know that letting you and those children stay here was the best decision I've made in years." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just squeezed his hand briefly and went inside,
before he could see the tears threatening to fall. The next week brought more bad news. Two of the families decided to leave. They packed their belongings quietly one morning and headed out before anyone could try to stop them. Iris didn't blame them. Starvation was a powerful motivator, and Pike had made it clear there was a path out if people were willing to abandon the fight. But their departure hit morale hard. If people were leaving now, how many more would follow when things got worse? The testimonies kept coming in, though. Slowly, carefully, people who'd been ruined by Pike shared their stories. Former ranch owners who'd lost everything to suspicious legal challenges. Business owners forced to sell at fractions of real value. Workers beaten for asking too many questions. The pattern was clear and damning. Samuel compiled it all into a detailed report. Dates, names, documented losses. It was compelling evidence of systematic corruption. The problem was getting it to the territorial investigators without Pike intercepting it. "We need someone he won't suspect," Clara said during one of their planning sessions. "Someone who can travel to the territorial capital without raising questions." "That's a 3-week round trip," Tom pointed out. "We'd need supplies we don't have. And whoever goes would be vulnerable the entire way," Henry added. "Pike has people watching the roads." They were still arguing about logistics when Delia spoke up. "What about the mail courier?" Everyone looked at her. "The territorial mail service runs independent routes," she continued. "Pike doesn't control them because they're federal. If we could get the documents into the official mail system, they'd reach the territorial capital safely." "Pike could still intercept them," Samuel said. "Not if we're smart about it." Delia was getting excited now, the way she did when solving a problem. "We send multiple copies through different routes. Make it impossible for him to stop all of them. Even if he intercepts one or two, at least one gets through." It was a good plan. Simple enough to work, complicated enough to give them odds better than 0. "Who has access to the mail courier?" Iris asked. "Anyone in town," Clara said. "You just drop packages at the post office and pay the fee." "Which Pike now owns," Tom reminded them. "The building, yes, but the postal service itself is federal. The postmaster answers to the territorial government, not to Pike. He can't legally refuse federal mail service." They worked out the details over the next 2 days. 3 copies of the complete report, sealed and addressed to different officials in the territorial capital. They'd send them on consecutive days through different people to minimize the chance of all 3 being intercepted. The first copy went with a traveling merchant who owed Samuel a favor. The second through a family passing through on their way east. The third would require someone from the ranch going into town directly, the most dangerous option. Iris volunteered. "Absolutely not," Caleb said immediately. "Pike's men know all of you. They'd search anyone from the ranch immediately, but I'm just the woman who keeps house. They think I'm harmless. They threatened you directly weeks ago. They threatened everyone, but they don't see me as dangerous." Iris met his eyes. "I can do this. I need to do this." The argument continued, but she'd already made up her mind. 2 days later, she drove the wagon into Hollow Creek alone, carrying the final copy of the report hidden in a flour sack beneath her seat. The town felt different now, hostile. People who'd been cautiously friendly before looked away when she passed. Pike's influence had spread like rot, turning neighbors into informants and friends into enemies. She tied the wagon outside the general store and walked to the post office with forced casualness. The postmaster was a thin man named Anderson, who'd always been fair but had learned not to ask questions. "Need to send a package," Iris said, placing the sealed envelope on the counter. Anderson glanced in the address. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. "That'll be $2? Iris paid. Anderson stamped the envelope and placed it in the outgoing mail bag. The whole transaction took maybe 30 seconds. She was turning to leave when Durst walked in. Pike's foreman looked at her with open hostility. His eyes moved from her face to the mailbag to Anderson and back again. "Mrs. Vane, surprising to see you in town. Thought Pike had made it clear your kind weren't welcome. I wasn't aware the post office had the same restrictions as private businesses." "Federal facility," Anderson said quietly. "I serve everyone." Durst's jaw tightened. "What were you mailing?" "That's between me and the Postal Service." "Show me the envelope." "It's already been processed and sealed. Federal mail tampering is a crime.
So is conspiracy and fraud, which is what I suspect you people are up to. Durst took a step closer. You're plotting something. Everyone knows it. And when Pike finds out what, this whole thing is going to end very badly for all of you. Iris forced herself to meet his eyes without flinching. Is there anything else? I have shopping to do. Shopping where? Every store that matters won't serve you. Then I guess I'll find stores that don't matter. She walked out before he could respond, every muscle screaming at her to run. But running would confirm his suspicions. So she forced herself to move casually, even stopping at the small bakery that hadn't been bought out yet to purchase bread they couldn't really afford. The baker, a woman named Ruth who'd always been kind, wrapped the bread carefully. I heard what you folks are doing out there, Ruth said quietly. Standing up to Pike. It's brave. It's desperate. Sometimes those are the same thing. Ruth glanced toward the street where Durst was visible talking to other men. Be careful, Mrs. Vane. Pike doesn't like losing. He'll burn everything down before he lets you win. I know. Then why keep fighting? Iris thought about the children, about Emmett giving up his food, about Delia mapping water systems, about the twins who were finally learning to laugh again. Because someone has to, she said simply. She made it back to the ranch without incident, but the tension didn't leave her until they received word 3 weeks later that the report had reached the territorial capital. All 3 copies. The investigation was being expedited based on the severity of the allegations. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like lighting a fuse and waiting for the explosion. Pike's response came within days. He didn't attack directly. Instead, he sent word through multiple channels that he knew about the reports, that he was aware of everyone who'd contributed testimony, that there would be consequences. The message was clear. Retribution was coming. People at the ranch became jumpy. Every sound in the night brought someone running with a weapon. The children picked up on the fear and started having nightmares. Delia stopped going to her garden alone. The twins refused to let Iris out of their sight. The siege was psychological now. Pike knew they were low on supplies, high on fear, and waiting for the other shoe to drop. So he simply waited, letting their own anxiety do most of the work. But he also started making targeted moves. Clara got word that her son, the older one who'd helped in the fight, had been picked up by Pike's men on the road and questioned for hours before being released with bruises and a warning. Henry's wife received a letter saying their daughter, who'd married and moved to a neighboring county, was being visited by men asking uncomfortable questions about her parents' activities. The message was consistent. We know where you are, we know who you love, and we can reach them anytime we want. It was effective psychological warfare. People who'd been committed started wavering. People who'd been wavering started planning to leave. Iris watched the coalition she'd helped build begin crumbling and felt helpless to stop it. You couldn't fight fear with logic. You couldn't inspire courage with speeches when people's families were being threatened. On the night she thought things couldn't get worse, they did. She woke to screaming, "Fire again!" But this time it wasn't the outbuildings. This time it was the main house. The flames had started in the kitchen, probably from accelerant poured through a broken window. By the time Iris smelled smoke, half the ground floor was burning. She grabbed the twins and ran, screaming for everyone else to get out. People poured from rooms in various states of dress, coughing, panicking. Caleb appeared from somewhere with Emmett. Clara helped an elderly couple who'd been sleeping downstairs. The children cried. The adults shouted, and the flames kept growing. They barely got everyone out before the roof started collapsing. Iris stood in the yard counting heads while the house burned behind her. 28 people. Everyone accounted for. But that was the only good news. They just lost their shelter with winter weeks away. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the main house was a smoking skeleton. The heat had damaged nearby structures. Everything they'd built, all the work and hope and desperate belief that they could make this place work, reduced to ash. Pike's men had probably been watching from the hills, enjoying the show. Iris looked at the devastation and felt something inside her break. Not dramatically, just a quiet recognition that they couldn't sustain this anymore. Every time they survived one attack, another came. Every time they adapted, Pike found a new way to hurt them. How long could they keep this up? How many times could they lose everything before there was nothing left to lose? She found Caleb near the burned barn, staring at the wreckage with an expression she couldn't read. "We need to evacuate," she said. "At least the children. Get them somewhere safe before... Before what? Before Pike burns that place too? Before his men find them and use them as leverage? Caleb's voice was hollow. There's nowhere safe. Not as long as he's in power. So what do we do? He looked at her with eyes that held exhaustion and something else. Determination, maybe. Or desperation sharp enough to cut. We finish this, he said, one way or another. No more waiting, no more reacting to his moves. We take the fight to him. How? The spring. We collapse it. Make the land worthless and force Pike to the negotiating table with nothing to gain. Iris stared at him. That's suicide. He'll kill us all out of spite. Maybe. But at least we'll have denied him what he wants. And maybe the territorial investigators will arrive before it gets that far. And if they don't? Caleb didn't answer. Because they both knew what that meant. They were past the point of good options. Now they were just choosing how to lose. On their terms or on Pike's. Around them, people were salvaging what they could from the ruins. Children huddled together for warmth. The community they'd built was still there, still functioning despite everything. But for how much longer? Iris thought about the dynamite hidden near the ridge, about the water source that could save them or destroy them depending on who controlled it. About 4 orphaned children who'd come here looking for a home and found a war zone instead. She'd made so many choices that led to this moment. Some good, some desperate, all made with incomplete information and impossible odds. Now one more choice remained. Surrender or scorched earth. Live on your knees or die standing. She looked at Caleb and nodded once. Show me how to set the charges, she said, and let's make sure Pike knows exactly what we're willing to destroy. They spent the next 2 days preparing the explosives while pretending everything was normal. Caleb and Tom worked at the eastern ridge under the pretense of surveying for a new well. Iris kept the children occupied with tasks that kept them far from where the real work was happening. The dynamite was old, salvaged from mining operations years earlier, unstable, dangerous, and exactly what they needed to collapse the underground spring system if it came to that. 3 charges, Caleb explained, showing her the placement points he'd mapped. Here at the main channel, here where it branches, and here at the source point. Detonate them in sequence and the whole system collapses inward, no water for miles in any direction. How long would it take to recover? Iris asked. Could be years, could be never. Underground water is unpredictable. Once you disrupt a system like this, there's no guarantee it reforms the same way. Iris looked at the peaceful landscape, trying to imagine it bone dry, trying to imagine being responsible for that choice. We're really doing this. We're preparing to do this. There's a difference. Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead. But yes, if Pike forces our hand, we pull the trigger. They buried the charges carefully, marking the locations only they would recognize. The detonators were hidden separately, insurance that no one could accidentally set them off, or deliberately if Pike's men found them first. By the 3rd day after the house fire, they'd relocated everyone to the barn and outbuildings. It was cramped and cold, but at least they had shelter. The children adapted the way children do, turning discomfort into adventure. The adults pretended to believe that made everything okay. Then word came that changed everything again. A rider arrived from town, not one of Pike's men but a farmer named Webb, who'd lost his land years earlier and harbored deep resentment about it. He found Caleb near the well. Pike's planning something big, Webb said without preamble. Heard it from one of his workers who drinks too much. They're gathering men, lots of them, planning to hit the ranch hard enough that you can't recover. When? Tomorrow night? Maybe the night after. Soon. Webb looked uncomfortable. I don't agree with what Pike does, but I got family to protect. I can't be part of whatever happens next. I just thought you should know. He left before Caleb could respond. The news spread through the ranch like poison. Tomorrow night. Maybe the night after. An attack large enough that Pike was gathering reinforcements for it. This was the endgame, and everyone knew it. That evening, Caleb called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the barn, adults and older children, faces grim in the lamplight. You all heard the news, he started. Pike's coming with enough men to finish this. I won't lie to you. Our chances aren't good. If you want to leave, now's the time. Take what you can carry and go. I'll give you what money I have left. No judgment, no hard feelings. Nobody moved. I mean it, Caleb continued. This is going to get violent. People could die. Your children could be caught in the crossfire. Leaving is the smart choice. Clara stood. Smart isn't always right. My boys and I are staying. So are we, Henry said, his wife nodding beside him. One by one, people voiced their commitment. Not because they thought they could win, not because they weren't terrified, but because something about this place and these people had become worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. Iris watched it happen and felt her throat tighten. These people had lost so much already, and here they were, choosing to risk the little they had left on principle and solidarity and stubborn refusal to accept that might made right. After the meeting dispersed, Caleb pulled Iris aside. I need you to take the children and leave, he said quietly, tonight, before Pike's men arrive. No. This isn't negotiable. Emmett, Delia, the twins, they don't deserve to be here for what's coming. None of us deserve it. That's not the point. Iris kept her voice level despite the fear crawling up her spine. Those children have been run off from every place they've tried to call home. I won't teach them that running is the only option when things get hard. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to survive. They're the same thing right now. She looked at him directly. And before you argue, remember that I'm the one who convinced half these people to stay. I'm the one who organized the testimonies that brought territorial investigators. I'm the one who's been rationing food and keeping children calm while everything burned around us. You don't get to send me away now because things are getting dangerous. They've been dangerous from the start. Caleb looked like he wanted to keep arguing. Instead, he just nodded once, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Then we make our stand together, he said, and we pray the investigators arrive before Pike's men do. But the next day brought no investigators, just more waiting, more fear, and the horrible certainty that time was running out. They spent the day preparing defenses, reinforcing positions, stockpiling ammunition, establishing fallback points. The children were moved to the most protected building with Clara and 2 other women assigned to guard them. The fighters, because that's what they'd become, took positions around the property perimeter. Iris found herself with a rifle she barely knew how to use, crouched behind a water trough with Samuel beside her. The sun was setting. Every shadow looked like an approaching threat. You scared? Samuel asked. Terrified, Iris admitted. You? I keep thinking about my mother. What she'd say if she knew I was about to fight armed men over water rights and principle. He laughed quietly. She always said I was too stubborn for my own good. My sister used to say the same thing about me. Said I'd rather die standing than live kneeling. She was right. Doesn't make it any less terrifying. They sat in silence as darkness fell. Hours passed. No attack came. Just tension stretching tighter and tighter until Iris thought she might scream just to break it. Around midnight, Emmett appeared beside her. You're supposed to be with the other children, she said. I'm not a child anymore. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder, too big for his frame but held with confidence. I can shoot. Caleb taught me. I'm not hiding while everyone else fights. Iris wanted to order him back to safety, wanted to protect him from this. But she looked at his face, so much older than 11, aged by loss and hardship into something harder, and realized he was right. He wasn't a child anymore. This world had stolen that from him. Stay behind cover, she said finally. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Yes, ma'am. He settled in beside her, and they waited together. The attack came just before dawn, when exhaustion made people careless and darkness still provided cover. Iris heard horses first, then voices. Then gunfire erupted from 3 different directions at once. Pike's men came in force. 20, maybe 30 riders hitting multiple points simultaneously. They weren't trying for subtlety this time. This was overwhelming force meant to break resistance quickly. The ranch defenders fired back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Bullets tore through wood and flesh. Someone screamed. A building caught fire. Chaos erupted across the property. Iris shot at shadows, not knowing if she hit anything. Beside her, Samuel fired methodically, picking targets with the careful precision of someone who'd accepted they might die but planned to take enemies with them. Emmett's rifle cracked again and again, the boy fighting like a soldier despite everything that was wrong about that. Then she saw Durst through the smoke and darkness. Pike's foreman was coordinating the attack from horseback, directing men like pieces on a board. If they could take him down, maybe the assault would lose cohesion. She aimed carefully, finger tightening on the trigger. A hand grabbed her wrist. Caleb, appearing from nowhere, pushed her rifle down. "Don't," he said. "The moment you kill one of them, this becomes a massacre. Right now, it's still just property destruction and intimidation. They're trying to kill us. They're trying to scare us into surrender. There's a difference." He pulled her down as bullets whined overhead. "Trust me. We can't win through violence. We can only survive long enough for help to arrive." "What if help doesn't come?" Caleb didn't answer, because they both knew that was a real possibility. The fighting continued for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Pike's men systematically destroyed everything they could reach: fences, equipment, storage buildings. They drove off the remaining cattle. They set fires. They shot out windows and shattered anything that looked valuable. But they didn't directly target people. That was deliberate, Iris realized. Pike wanted them broken and desperate, but not martyred. Dead ranchers would bring questions. Terrorized ranchers would just leave. As dawn broke, the attackers pulled back. Durst shouted something about final warnings and last chances, then led his men away at a leisurely pace that communicated absolute confidence in eventual victory. The silence after they left was worse than the noise had been. Iris emerged from cover and looked at the devastation. 2 more buildings destroyed, the last of their cattle gone. 3 people wounded, though none fatally. The children were safe, thank everything, but traumatized in ways that would take years to heal. This was defeat. Slow, grinding, inevitable defeat. She found Caleb near the burned barn, staring at wreckage with an expression she couldn't read. "We can't keep doing this," she said. "I know. We need to collapse the spring, today, now, before he comes back and finishes the job." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Get everyone to safety first. Take them to town, to other ranches, anywhere away from here. Then we'll set the charges. Pike's men will see people leaving. They'll know something's happening. Let them. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late." They spent the morning organizing evacuation. Most people left willingly, exhausted beyond the point of resistance. Claire and her sons volunteered to stay and help with the final stand. Tom refused to leave. A handful of others made the same choice, knowing it might be their last. The children were the hardest part. Emmett understood what was happening and argued fiercely to stay. Delia cried, but accepted it. The twins just held on to Iris like they'd never let go. "I have to do this," Iris told them, kneeling in the dirt to meet their eyes. "But I promise, I will come back for you. Do you understand? Whatever happens here, I will find you after." "You're lying," Bess said quietly. She'd barely spoken in months, but now her voice was clear. "Adults always lie when they think we're going to get hurt." The words cut deeper than any bullet could have. "I'm not lying," Iris said, even though she knew Bess was probably right. "I'm making you a promise, and I keep my promises." She sent them with Henry's family to a ranch 15 miles south, watched them ride away in a wagon, 4 small figures disappearing into the distance, watched until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she turned back to the ranch and prepared to destroy it. The charges were ready. The detonators in place. They'd marked 3 firing points far enough from the explosions to be safe. Caleb explained the sequence one more time. "I trigger the first charge. That destabilizes the main channel. 30 seconds later, Tom triggers the second. That collapses the branch system. 30 seconds after that, you trigger the third. That seals the source." "And then?" Clara asked. "And then the entire underground spring system caves in. No more water. No reason for Pike to want this land." "No reason for anyone to want it," Tom corrected. "That's the point." Caleb's voice was grim. "Scorched earth. If we can't have it, nobody can." They took their positions. Iris crouched behind rocks near the eastern ridge with the detonator at her feet. Her hands were shaking. This was it. The moment everything came down to. One choice that would echo for decades. She thought about Margaret, about what her sister would say if she could see this. Probably something about stubbornness and principles and choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. She thought about the children, about whether this was protecting them or just dragging them through trauma after trauma. She thought about Caleb and everyone else who'd stayed, about the community they'd built from desperation and determination. And she thought about Vernon Pike, sitting somewhere comfortable, confident that money and power always won in the end. She picked up the detonator. Then she heard horses. Not attacking this time. Approaching fast but not hostile. She looked toward the road and saw riders carrying official territorial flags. The investigators. They'd finally arrived. Iris ran toward Caleb's position, screaming for him to wait. She saw him look up, saw recognition cross his face, saw his hand move away from his own detonator. The investigators pulled up in the yard. 3 officials, 2 armed escorts, and someone Iris didn't expect to see. The territorial governor himself. He dismounted and surveyed the devastation with an expression that mixed shock and anger. "Which one of you is Caleb Mercer?" he demanded. Caleb stepped forward. "I am. I'm Governor Matthews. We've been reviewing the documentation sent to our office regarding Vernon Pike's activities in this region." He gestured at the burned buildings, the obvious signs of recent attack. "I see the situation is worse than reported. Pike hit us last night," Caleb said. "Destroyed most of what we had left. We were about to take final measures." "What kind of final measures?" Caleb explained about the spring, about the explosives, about the choice between surrendering to corruption or making the land worthless to everyone. Matthews listened with an expression that grew increasingly dark. "Mr. Mercer, what you're describing is destruction of territorial water resources. That's a federal crime. So is what Pike's been doing. Difference is we're desperate and he's just greedy. Desperation doesn't justify—" Matthews stopped himself, looked around at the remaining defenders, exhausted and armed, standing on land they'd bled for. "How many people died defending this place?" "None yet, but we came close." "And how many lost everything because Vernon Pike decided he wanted what they had?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds across 3 counties. Matthews nodded slowly. "Show me your evidence. Everything you sent to my office and anything else you've collected." Samuel brought the records. Testimonies, documentation, pattern analysis, everything they'd compiled. The governor read for 20 minutes while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. "This is comprehensive and damning." He folded the papers. "Vernon Pike is going to answer for what he's done. I'm placing him under territorial investigation effective immediately. All his land acquisitions will be frozen pending review. Any businesses he's purchased will be held in trust until ownership can be properly determined." "He'll fight this," Caleb said. "He has judges in his pocket." "He has local judges. I have federal authority." Matthew's voice was steel. "And right now, I'm very motivated to make an example of territorial corruption." Iris felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly. More like the absence of the constant pressure that had been building for months. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we clean up this mess. I'm stationing federal marshals in Hollow Creek until the investigation concludes. Anyone who's been displaced by Pike's actions will have their cases reviewed. Property will be returned where possible. And Mr. Pike himself is going to spend a lot of time answering very uncomfortable questions." He paused, looking at Iris directly. "I understand from the reports that you organized much of this resistance, Mrs. Vane. That took considerable courage." "It took desperation. Courage is just a nice word for not having better options." Matthews almost smiled. "Sometimes those are the same thing." The next few days were a blur of activity. Federal marshals arrived and started documenting evidence. People who'd fled the ranch began returning cautiously. The territorial government seized Pike's assets pending investigation. The man himself was arrested trying to flee the territory. The tide had turned, not completely, not perfectly, but enough that survival stopped being a daily question and started being a reasonable expectation. A week after the investigators arrived, Iris rode out to collect the children. They'd been safe with Henry's family, but she'd kept her promise. She was coming back for them. When she arrived, all 4 children ran to her. Even Emmett, who'd been so careful about showing emotion, grabbed onto her and didn't let go for a long moment. "I told you I'd come back," Iris said. "I didn't believe you," Bess admitted. "I know, but I'm here anyway." They rode back to Mercer Ranch together. The place was still damaged, still showing signs of everything they'd survived. But people were rebuilding, not just structures, rebuilding belief that this place could be something permanent. Caleb met them in the yard. He'd been working on the barn roof, covered in sawdust and looking more alive than Iris had seen him in months. "Welcome home," he said.
Emmett looked at the damaged buildings, the burned areas, the obvious signs of recent violence. This doesn't look like much of a home. Not yet, Caleb agreed, but it will be. We've got time now, and people willing to work. That's enough to start with. Over the following months, things slowly normalized. Not back to what they'd been. There was no going back to innocence or simplicity, but forward into something new.
The territorial investigation concluded with Pike being convicted of multiple counts of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. His property was liquidated and distributed back to people he'd stolen from. The water rights were restructured to prevent future monopolies. Hollow Creek, instead of dying, began attracting new settlers who'd heard about the town that stood up to corruption. Mercer Ranch became the center of that story. They rebuilt the house, expanded the operations, created a genuine cooperative where multiple families pooled resources and shared both risk and reward. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments and setbacks, and moments when old fears resurfaced, but it worked. Delia's garden expanded into several acres of productive farmland. She developed a reputation for understanding soil and water in ways that seemed almost supernatural. By the time she was 12, other ranchers were asking her advice. Emmett grew into the kind of young man who commanded respect through competence rather than bravado. He learned ranching from Caleb with an intensity that suggested he planned to never be powerless again. He was 15 when Caleb officially made him foreman of the Eastern Range. The twins, Marcus and Bess, finally got to be children. They ran wild across open land, collected interesting rocks, learned to ride, and slowly forgot what it felt like to constantly be afraid. Bess started talking more. Marcus developed a sense of humor that kept everyone on their toes, and Iris found something she hadn't expected. Peace, not the absence of problems. There were still hard winters, difficult decisions, and moments when old trauma resurfaced. But she'd learned that peace wasn't about circumstances. It was about having people you could trust when circumstances got bad. One evening, almost 2 years after the investigators arrived, Iris stood on the porch of the rebuilt house, watching the sun set over land that had almost destroyed them. The view was different now. Where there'd been desperation, there was productivity. Where there'd been isolation, there was community. Caleb joined her, the way he often did. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked. "Why would you think that?" "Because staying here was never your plan. You came here running from grief, looking for temporary shelter. Now that things are stable, I wouldn't blame you for moving on to something better." Iris considered that. It was true. She'd never intended this to be permanent, but then she'd never intended to help organize a resistance movement or nearly blow up a water source or watch children learn to shoot before they learned to read properly. "I thought about it," she admitted, "about taking the children somewhere safer, easier, somewhere without so many bad memories. And I realized something. Safety isn't a place, it's people. Those children, they don't need perfect circumstances. They need to know that when things get hard, the people around them won't run." She looked at Caleb. "We've given them that. It's messy and imperfect and sometimes terrifying, but it's real." "So you're staying?" "We're staying, if that's still acceptable to you." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had the property deed transferred yesterday. Half the ranch is in your name now. Has been for a few weeks, actually. Just took time to process the paperwork." Iris stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because none of this would exist without you. The resistance, the community, the survival, all of it came from your refusal to accept defeat as inevitable." He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't used to expressing sentiment. "And because I want you to know this is your home. Not just shelter, not just employment. Home." Iris felt tears threatening and forced them back. She'd cried enough over the past 2 years. Right now, she just wanted to appreciate what they'd built. Below them, Hollow Creek glowed with evening lights. The town that had been dying was alive again. People walked the streets without fear. Businesses thrived. Children played in yards that had been abandoned just years earlier. It wasn't perfect. Vernon Pike's influence had done lasting damage that would take generations to fully heal. Some families never recovered from what they'd lost. The trauma everyone carried would surface in unexpected ways for years to come. But they'd survived. More than that, they'd proven something fundamental, that ordinary people refusing to accept injustice could actually change outcomes. Not easily, not without cost, but it was possible. Iris thought about Margaret, about what her sister would think seeing her now. Standing on a porch she part-owned, watching over children who were thriving, surrounded by a community built from stubbornness and solidarity, Margaret would probably laugh and say, "I always knew you were too stubborn to die quietly." She'd be right. Inside the house, dinner was being prepared by multiple families working together. The smell of cooking food drifted through the open windows. Children's laughter mixed with adult conversation. It was chaotic and loud and nothing like the silent, haunted house Iris had first entered years ago. "You know what the hardest part is?" Iris said quietly. "What?" "Teaching them that the world isn't always this hard, that what we went through was extreme, that most of life is actually mundane and boring and safe." She paused. "How do you give children normal childhoods after they've seen the things we've all seen?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "But maybe that's not our job. Maybe our job is just to give them space to heal. Let them be bored. Let them be safe. Let them learn that not every sunset signals another attack coming." "You think they can unlearn fear?" "I think children are more resilient than we give them credit for. Look at Emmett. He's not that scared kid who arrived with a knife under his pillow anymore. Delia's not the girl who felt responsible for holding everyone together. The twins actually play instead of just surviving." He glanced at her. "You did that. You gave them room to become themselves instead of just survivors." Iris wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that love and stability could undo trauma, that time could heal what violence had broken. Maybe it could. Maybe it couldn't completely, but maybe partial healing was enough. As full darkness fell, people began gathering inside for dinner. Iris and Caleb joined them, taking seats at a table that had been extended multiple times to accommodate everyone. The meal was simple but abundant. Vegetables from Delia's garden, meat from their own cattle, bread baked that afternoon. They ate together, this makeshift family built from desperation and determination. They argued about who was supposed to wash dishes, teased each other about burned biscuits, made plans for tomorrow's work. It was ordinary, mundane, exactly what they'd fought so hard to achieve. After dinner, Emmett approached Iris. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." "Do you regret it? Bringing us here? Everything that happened?" Iris thought about that honestly. About the fear, the violence, the near starvation, the trauma they'd all endured. About how many times she'd questioned whether protecting them required running away instead of standing still. "I regret that you had to see the things you saw," she said finally. "I regret that you learned about violence and injustice before you learned about safety and fairness. But no, I don't regret coming here because this place, these people, this community, it's real in a way that running never would have been. Even though we almost died, because we didn't die. We survived, and that means something." Emmett nodded slowly. "I used to be angry at you for not taking us somewhere safer, for making us fight instead of run. I know. I'm not angry anymore. I'm glad we stayed. I'm glad I know how to fight for things that matter." He walked away before Iris could respond, leaving her standing in the kitchen with tears finally spilling over. These children. These impossible, resilient, damaged, beautiful children. They'd survived what would have broken most adults. And somehow, against every odd, they were going to be okay. Later that night, Iris checked on them before bed the way she always did. Emmett was asleep with books about ranching scattered around him. Delia had fallen asleep over her garden notebooks. The twins were tangled together like puppies, completely at peace. She stood in the doorway watching them breathe and thought about all the moments that had led here. The desperate letter answering Caleb's advertisement, the terrifying arrival in Hollow Creek, the first meal, intense silence, the fires, the fights, the fear that never quite left. And she thought about the choices that had defined everything. The choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The choice to fight when surrender was inevitable. The choice to believe that ordinary people refusing to accept injustice could actually matter. Those choices had cost them security, innocence, any illusion that the world was fair. But they'd also given them something precious, proof that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and choosing to act anyway. Iris closed the door quietly and walked back downstairs. Caleb was on the porch again, his usual position. She sat beside him. "They're all asleep," she said. "Good, they need it. They sat in comfortable silence. Around them, the ranch settled into night. Horses in the stable, cattle in distant fields, people in various buildings, all part of the extended community that had grown from one desperate stand against impossible odds. "Do you think it'll last?" Iris asked. "This peace we've built? Nothing lasts forever. There'll be other challenges, other Vernon Pikes in different forms. The world doesn't stop producing men who think power gives them the right to take what they want." That's bleak. That's honest. But here's what I know. We proved it's possible to fight back. That matters. The next time someone tries what Pike did, people will remember what happened here. They'll remember that resistance is possible. Iris considered that. So we're not just building a ranch, we're building a precedent. Maybe. Or maybe we're just building a home and the precedent is a side effect. Caleb looked at her. Either way, it's worth protecting. Worth dying for? Let's hope it doesn't come to that again. But yes, some things are worth dying for, or more importantly, worth living for even when it's hard. They sat together as stars emerged overhead, bright and indifferent to human struggle. Somewhere out there, other families were facing their own versions of what they'd survived. Other desperate choices. Other impossible odds. Iris hoped some of them found the same stubborn courage that had kept her moving forward when everything said to give up. Hoped they found communities worth fighting for. Hoped they learned that survival wasn't about accepting whatever powerful people decided was inevitable. Because that was the real lesson of everything they'd endured. Not that good always triumphed over evil. It didn't. Not that justice was guaranteed. It wasn't. But that ordinary people refusing to accept injustice could shift outcomes, could create space for something better, could prove that might didn't have to make right. It wasn't a clean lesson, wasn't a satisfying one. But it was true. And truth, Iris had learned, was worth more than comfort. She stood eventually, exhaustion pulling at her bones. "I'm going to bed. You coming?" "In a bit. I want to check the fences one more time." "Caleb, the fences are fine. You're just avoiding sleep." He smiled slightly. "Maybe." "Come inside. The ranch will still be here tomorrow." He followed her in, and they climbed the stairs together. At the top, they paused outside their respective rooms, a boundary they'd maintained despite everything that had grown between them. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly. "For what?" "For being stubborn, for refusing to accept defeat, for saving this place and everyone in it. We saved it together, that's the point. None of us could have done it alone." "Maybe. But you started it. That matters." He went to his room before she could respond. Iris stood in the hallway for a moment, then went into her own room and closed the door. She lay down in a bed that had become familiar, in a house that had become home, and let herself believe, really believe, that maybe they'd actually made it through. The worst was over. Not forever. Not permanently. But for now. And sometimes, now was enough. She closed her eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in longer than she could remember. Outside, Mercer Ranch settled into peaceful darkness. The wind moved through rebuilt fences and new-growth gardens. Cattle grazed under stars that had witnessed everything and offered no judgment. The eastern ridge, where explosives had nearly brought everything down, stood quiet and solid. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There'd be work to do, problems to solve, moments when old fears resurfaced. But there'd also be laughter and meals shared and children growing up in a place that had proven safety wasn't given. It was built by people who refused to accept any other option. That was what they'd created here. Not perfection, not paradise. Just a place where ordinary people who'd lost everything had found each other and decided losing again wasn't acceptable. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. And that, ultimately, was enough.